joining today. If anyone else is going to be turning up, I will be entering them in. So what I'm going to be talking about today is how we can become caught up in our inner world, how we can be swayed by the version that we tell ourselves from external sources, from what's going on around us. We have this inner voice that is having an opinion and having a way of talking to us that can be quite overwhelming at times and very negative and self-critical. Now, the importance of understanding that our inner critic is just one version of what's going on around us, the events that we are involved with or seeing around us, that this inner critic is just one way of looking at that situation. But when we're in it and when we have this voice that continually tells us things or a version of how things are in a certain way, it becomes so embedded and so automatic that we don't question it any longer. And it can be something that's been there a long, long time. So, my work as a therapist is to try and help people to understand what that voice is, first of all, telling you, because sometimes we're not even aware, we're just so automatically going with what we think is going on, what we tell ourselves, but we're not even aware that we have an opinion that can be challenged. So, my job as a therapist first is to help people to really understand that that inner critic is just one version. And then, of course, that there are other opinions and other ways of looking at this and other ways of talking to ourselves that can then lead us to see events around us not in a sort of fixed mindset, which sort of says that there's no growth or no potential to change, that this is the way we are or this is the way things are. So when we're in that fixed mindset, the critical voice is almost coming from that version. And what we need to get to is a way of seeing that whatever's happening now, there is a potential to change, that there is a potential for me to respond and react differently and learn from this and get better at handling something and better at responding to things and building more resilience. So that's what I mean by the growth mindset. So it's about that ability to see that I can change how I'm responding and that things can change potentially because of the way I'm appraising the situation or myself. Because the situation out there might not change that much, but how we are attending to it and responding to it can certainly change. And that's where we can develop a different set of skills for the future. So I'm a therapist working in the UK, and I've been working in mental health field since the 90s. I've been a CBT therapist, but also interpersonal therapy and trauma-based therapy for many years. So I've worked with a lot of people, and my speciality really is self-esteem, confidence, and depression and anxiety. But that confidence that comes from our world view of who we see ourselves and how we see ourselves. And it's that ability to start making changes in that, which is really important. So let's start by sort of really getting to grips with the inner critic. So if you are aware that in any situation, there might be a voice in your head that's having a bit of a conversation or a bit of um, a chatter or trying to make sense of what's going on around. And we identify that voice as being us. So we are the sort of observer voice, I guess, in our heads. But if we take a step back from that, we are not that voice because we are observing ourselves having that conversation. So our mind and our way of interpreting the world provides us with these conversations, these ways of trying to understand through language, through the way we talk to ourselves. But that voice isn't static, and it doesn't mean that we only have one way of looking at things. And that's what's really interesting. So it's more helpful to see that we can have different versions of events and different ways of talking to ourselves. And the inner critic is only one. So if you see it as like, on a mixing desk where you have loads of different volume buttons, and one of those might be the biggest one with a big A on it and a big red knob is the inner critic maybe for you. But that has a volume counter on it, and you can turn that volume down. And then you can look at and see if there's other ways that you can think about whatever's going on around you or within you, and you can turn the volume up on that dial that maybe is more helpful for you right now. Now, the problem with the inner critic is it's biased. So it's looking at things from the threat response, from the response where it's looking to try and protect you or prevent something bad from happening, but it's coming from the bias of that something bad is going to happen. So it can be a barrier for new challenges because it's seeing threat and it's not seeing that something might be worth overcoming in order to learn something new, build that resource that tells us that we can develop new skills and be more present in the world as it is. So the inner critic is just one voice, just one way, but it can be very fixed and very threat based. So that is going to stop us from taking on the challenges that maybe we need and want really to take on. So, first of all, to get out of the old way that we might be responding to things, we have to be paying attention to what it is we are responding to. And that can be a little bit challenging when we are so used to just going along, doing what we're doing, thinking what we're thinking without really listening to ourselves that much. It's almost like it's happening, but we're not really giving it our full attention. A bit like if you drive or if you walk to a certain sort of place, maybe place of work every day, you may not pay attention to everything that's going on around you because it's so automatic. You know that the tree is on the left, you know the next right-hand turning goes wherever it goes, and you just don't really think about those things anymore. You're just going with the flow. But what I'd ask you to do is start to pay more attention and exploring what it is that maybe you are looking at and thinking about and how you're talking to yourself about what's going on around you. So, exploring that role of your inner voice means that you are going to be um, looking at how do I embrace things that are going on around me? How am I adapting to them? Or how am I maybe telling myself that I won't be able to cope, I won't be able to deal with this, I won't be able to handle it? So stop and pause is the first sort of way to try and help yourself understand what's going on. Stop, pause, take a breath, and just notice. So this is useful when we find ourselves maybe becoming tense or we are having an experience where we're not quite sure what's going on. And it feels important it feels like everything is telling me I shouldn't be doing this, but I don't know why. Then, okay, let's just stop, take a breath, and then notice, right, what am I saying to myself? What's going through my head right now? How am I feeling? How am I in myself? And what do I need right now? So paying attention, that's the first stage to making any change. Then when we can notice that inner critic voice, we can then maybe start to pay attention to, well, what is that saying? You might then notice that there are things that you're telling yourself that are telling yourself, well, I don't think you can do that, or are you sure? And what if? So if you notice, you might be able to recognize that there's more self-doubting sort of thoughts that come to you, that you might notice that there's more what if thoughts that are looking at what's going to go wrong next and how you might then fail at something or things are going to go wrong. And there's a fear attached to that inner critic. So recognizing how that voice in your head is maybe stopping you from trying, stopping you from taking on new things because it's telling you that it's going to go wrong, it's not going to go well, that it says something about you as a person. When you are understanding that and how the inner critic impacts in new challenges, then this appraisal of what your voice is sort of telling you can help you then to see how you might be able to come to a different sort of perspective. And we'll come to that in a minute. But it's useful to, when you are noticing that voice in your head, that inner critic that's giving you that doubt, to start holding this potential that I can change the way that I'm talking to myself. Now I know that I'm giving myself this message that's often very negative, putting myself down, thinking that I know what other people are thinking about me when I don't really, is giving me a more negative view of my ability, which is making me feel more fixed in my view of myself. So your identity becomes more fixed. So once you are starting to sort of see that, this stage, it's actually really important to foster that sense of compassion and kindness, that you're more aware now of the critical voice, but not to be disheartened by that, because this is now where you can start to make a change to that. But people, and I've noticed this when I'm working with people, can get a bit overwhelmed at this point, because what you're doing is you're seeing how hard you are on yourself, and it feels quite overwhelming, just quite upsetting that you are your worst enemy, that you are your harshest critic. And often that comes from the past. So there's reasons why that might have happened. There's influences in your life, sometimes from early childhood, but sometimes from people around you that might be more critical of you, or they don't cherish the things about you that are different, or they don't recognize the successes that you are getting, or are threatened by things that you do well. So there might be many reasons why this critical voice is there. And what we need to do is sort of help ourselves to foster that sort of courage to take that on and understand that where that's come from. So once we are recognizing that and noticing that this voice is coming from fear, and it's also coming probably from the past, then our efforts to overcome it become something that can reinforce that sense that I can learn and grow and develop. So just the process of understanding the inner critic voice and that you can make changes can move you from the fixed view that nothing will change, the potential within me is stuck, to I have now some sense that things can get better. And they won't get better immediately or all at once. But if I keep noticing when that inner critic is happening, I have opportunities at different points now to try and find a different way of looking at this situation and turn the volume down on that inner critic. So it's really fundamental. Growth mindset doesn't come just suddenly, oh, I've got a growth mindset, but it's like the seed that you start watering, that you are seeing that I can change the way that I talk to myself. I can move myself from being the critic to being more pragmatic, or being more supportive, or being the mentor to myself that sets standards but also sees the support that I need and require. So reappraising, this is what we're talking about here. So silencing or turning the volume down, because sometimes we can't silence it altogether, particularly when there's been a lot of experiences in our past that have given us this very powerful critical voice. But we can certainly see ourselves turning that down. One way, like I was saying, of helping ourselves with this is seeing that when we are having an emotional response to something, and that in the past we've automatically said, well, that means that this is showing that if I'm struggling with something, it's showing that I'm no good at it, really. It's showing that I will never be good at something. That inner critical voice is telling you that the struggle's not worth it. But if you can reappraise the struggle and stress of trying something in a different way, is a sign that things can change, because you have the potential to look at this from a version of hope and how you might support somebody else. Then you are seeing that I'm able to have a sense of challenge and struggle that isn't automatically meaning something's wrong. It just means this is hard and it's going to take time. So if you can embrace a learning approach where struggle is not bad, but struggle is hard, but not bad, and it leads to something different, and it doesn't always mean success straight away, but it leads to input, feedback that I can take something from and develop and reappraise again to build up a sense of taking something on. We know that in children, they automatically are coming from this sort of mindset early on. So when children are very young developmentally, they haven't got a limited belief system. They are not coming from a fixed mindset. They have automatically got this growth mindset. If you take a child who's learning how to crawl or walk for the first time, they are motivated to do that, but they are not expecting it to happen straight away, but they continually fail, try again, fail, adapt it, building up that strength in their muscles and strength in their way that they need to put things together, the mobility and the mechanics of that, in order to finally get to a point where they're able to stand and start taking steps. And then that builds into getting more proficient at it. So our minds are maybe set in that way, but then over time with other inputs, we can become less able to see or take the courage to take on new things, because we've had some of these cultural and environmental aspects that haven't been supportive. So what can we take from that? Mistakes provide the feedback that can help us show the areas that we can improve. So if we are embracing learning and seeing learning as part of our process of growth, we are welcoming, that might be a too strong a word, but we are certainly embracing and certainly seeing that mistakes are part of the process, and we can't improve without taking steps that we don't know what things are going to turn out like. And sometimes things are going to go well and sometimes not so well. And when we're getting the feedback and constructively looking at what went wrong and what didn't, what can I use from that to build in a strategy that might be more useful for me next time? And that, in essence, is the growth mindset in play. So We are not looking to eliminate stress and struggle, and we're not looking to eliminate mistakes. What we're doing is seeing that they are all part of how we grow and develop as a person, and they're useful to us. So they're not fearful. And we are appraising our ability to use that information so that we're not so bound or distressed by other people's opinions of that. Because if we know what we are doing and why we're doing it, and if that helps us in a way that we can then progress and maybe help other people, then it's not so necessary to rely on other people's feedback as meaning that we are doing well enough or not. So, a framework for the reappraisal, because the reappraisal is really, recognizing that inner critic and the way that the inner critic is talking to us about what's going on. We need to know how to think about that differently and appraise the same situation in a different way. So, an important part of that is to recognize that the inner critic is based in threat. And with that fear response is writing down what you're saying to yourself, what your thoughts are, and what it is, maybe an image of that, and what that says about you. So when we have this inner critic, often what's happening is you're taking that as meaning something about your identity, who you are as a person. And we need to separate that out. So having the inner critical voice doesn't mean you as a person are bad, that if you're having this struggle, you're a failure. If you find this really a hard effort to take on, maybe, learning a language and it's not seem to be going in, that means you're never going to learn it. It's about understanding that those thoughts are based on a pattern of thinking, a fear that things are not going to go well and you might be judged or rejected by those around you. And it's keeping you stuck. And instead, you are embracing the challenges based on this growth mindset, which means that the mistakes or the challenges, the things that are hard to understand, are where you're getting the feedback, where you're getting that information that helps you to adapt and develop new strategies to try and work your way through what's going on. So, a good way to deal with getting that reappraisal is to write down, once you've written down those thoughts based on the fear, is to then look at those thoughts and try and step back and see, well, if this was happening to somebody else, what would I say to somebody else? What advice would I give them? How would I talk to them? What tone of voice would I use? How would I deal with this so that you were looking at the situation or the role that someone plays or the actions they took rather than them as a person? So there's a difference there between how you see the actions and how you see the person and their identity. So a bit like we can sort of see that someone has reacted in a certain way. I don't like the way that you walked out of the room and didn't say goodbye, rather than you're a really rubbish person because you never say goodbye to anybody. So you're taking away that personal element when you're recognizing the problem and trying to see it as the behavior or the action and how you would advise in that approach. Okay, so this is the sort of framework that I use with people when we're trying to understand and step back from the automatic. So I call this the ABC framework, and it's really helpful for just making that change from the way you automatically do something into something that's more constructive and helpful for us to understand. So it's a reappraisal of the struggle and the stress and the signs that you are noticing. So initially, that's stop, take a breath, notice, and what's activating this situation right now. So that's the A. And what are your triggers? So you're writing down what those triggers are and how you might be reacting internally as well as externally. And then the B is the beliefs. So what are the thoughts? So with that critical voice, what is it saying? Are there any images? And what does that mean? What's the interpretation? And that can take a little bit of time and that can take a little bit of practice because it's under the surface. It's not something we're really conscious about. It's more about the meanings and interpretations based on the past. So sometimes people struggle with that on their own, but it is, a helpful part of this. And the C is the consequences. So, what happens as a result of the trigger that's happened, that activating part, and the beliefs that we have, the automatic and the subconscious, and how that links to our emotional response, how we physically are, and what actions, what behaviors we take. The points where we can really do something about are, of course, the triggers are the triggers, but it's in how do we talk to ourselves in a different way and how can we maybe then take a different behavior. So when we're looking at if we've been critical to ourselves, what approach would I say if this was somebody else? What feedback could I give that would be less biased and more practical, maybe more helpful for this person in this time? So you write down those alternatives, and then you write down what might be another way that you can try for next time, what might be a more helpful approach that might get you to a different place than you have on this occasion. So it's not to berate yourself that, oh, I messed up, but okay, so I fell into the old pattern again. What can I do differently? How can I transform this? So your reflection is looking to seek constructive ways, new strategies to learn from this situation that you found yourself in to move it into something new. Now, all of this is in my new training that's coming up very soon. And it is really about how to take that framework and really go through a number of different examples and strategies to build up that sense of what that voice is like and how I can change that through different approaches to build a new way, a new version for myself. So if you are interested in that, feel free to, in the chat, just put down that you're interested in that training that will be coming up soon. And my email is info@carrydubbertherapy.co.uk, and that's my website. So if you do want more information on other trainings, but also information from my blog, feel free to have a look and email me if you want to. Okay, so hopefully in this short sort of webinar, what we've been trying to do really is, if you get nothing else from this webinar, that you understand that the way that you talk to yourself in your head isn't fixed. It's not the only version and it's not the only way. And even if you've been talking to yourself in this way for a long time, it's not going to stay like that. You have every opportunity to start to challenge that inner critic and find a more compassionate, more helpful response and appraise the situation in a different way. And it's also really helpful to sort of see that the signs and stress that you might be feeling doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't able to manage things and you can't cope. But it's just that this situation is very hard and it's a struggle, but that struggle doesn't stay the same. And through learning, you can adapt your approach and see it in a different way moving forward. So connecting to the struggle can really help us to find different resources then to move through it. And another sort of really impactful way of looking at this is the more that I support myself, the more then I can utilize that support to help others too. So it's thinking about that. What advice would I give to somebody else? Is when I work with people, that's what comes out of it, is then that becomes something much easier to give advice to others, to help other people. You start spotting that in other people, and it can really help you. It's like a feedback the other way round. The more you see it in yourself, the more you can help other people. So thank you for paying attention today. I'm going to stop sharing and stop the recording. And if there are any questions, please feel free to ask.